Hi, everyone. Now, when we're doing a question like this where we're talking about expanding, right? Because we're looking at these two brackets and they're saying, all right, you want to simplify this and get an equivalent expression to it, right? Now, remember, we talked about this in a previous question where if I have a situation that is a little bit more complicated, we want to simplify that. Now, before we even start doing that, we want to kind of just like understand what I is, because it's saying I is equal to the square root of -1. Now, we know that we can't have a negative under the square root, right? That's just, we always talk about this. It's impossible. It doesn't exist. Now, it doesn't exist in the real numbers. You know how you say X is an element of all real numbers when you're doing domain and range, right? So with domain, you say X is an element of all real numbers, and you go like this, X is an element of all real numbers, such that dot, 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 if X is greater than 1 or whatever. Now, in this case, it's saying that we're not in the reals, we're in the complex numbers. You don't have to worry about that, right? Most people, when they read this question, they're like, oh no, I've never seen this before. This is impossible. But here's the thing. You don't even have to worry about that because really you're just trying to find something that's equivalent to this expression over here, right? And if we can find something that's equivalent to this expression by just subbing in back that, one and square root of -1 is equal to I, then it works out for us, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to ignore the fact that we don't know complex numbers and we're going to expand this. So we're going to expand this and kind of simplify as much as we can. So if I were to rewrite this, I say, 10I minus 4I squared, nothing is happening to that bracket. But the second bracket, I see that I need to distribute this negative to both the 7 and the -3I to simplify this expression. So I have -7 plus, because negative, 3I. And then I noticed that if these were x's, right, if I were to write this as 10x, and I'm going to erase this stuff over here so it doesn't confuse us. So 10x plus, or sorry, that's minus. So minus 4x squared minus 7 plus 3x, right? We could just treat it as a variable so we're not confusing, oh, what's I or whatever. We will bring it back in the end, but right now I'm just gonna pretend it looks like this. And what would I do if I had this situation? You know what? Yeah, I would collect like terms. I'd bring the 10x with the 3x. So I'd say -4x squared plus 10x plus 3x minus 7. So collect like terms, then simplify. So -4x squared, 10 plus 3. So I have 13x minus 7, right? Now, remember, we weren't dealing with x, so what I'm going to say is I'm going to bring back, instead of x, I'm going to bring back that I. So I'm going to say, okay, so I have this is equal to -4I squared plus 13I minus 7. I'm just using what I had over here and kind of just writing it in terms of I. And my first I kind of looks really wacky, so I'm going to erase that, write it a little bit nicer. There we are. Okay. Now, remember, I is equal to the square root of -1. So what we're going to do is we're going to substitute that for I. So I'm going to say, you know what, I'm going to sub I is equal to root -1 into wherever I is. So I'm going to say -4. Let's move that a little bit to the bottom so I have some space to work with. So it's equal to -4. Instead of I squared, I'll have root -1 all squared, right? Because that's the I, but instead of, so this is I, and then we know it was I squared, so I just squared that entire bracket. And then I have plus 13. Well, I was -root 1, so I'm going to say root of -1 minus 7. All right, I want to simplify this further so I can say, well, if I do this, right, let me just use a different color here. If I do the root of -1 all squared, what happens to any time I have a square root of, like, let's say just a random, just x, and I square this entire thing? Yeah, we've done this before. Square root undoes the square undoes the square root. They undo each other, right? Just like that. So then I'm only left with x. So just the same way with the -1, the square over here will undo the square root. So then I'm just going to have -4 multiplied by -1 plus 13 multiplied by, I'll keep it as -1 for now, -7. Okay. This turns into, instead of -4 multiplied by -1, just 4 minus 13, sorry, plus 13. Now, the reason I'm going to do what I'm going to do next is because the answers are not written in terms of the negative root of the root of -1. They're written in terms of I. So that's why I'm going to turn this root of -1. I don't know why I keep calling it the root of -1 into just an I, right? So remember how I made this distribution in the beginning, I? Instead of writing I wrote the root of -1. It helped when I had the square root because it got rid of the square root. Sorry, the square. So, but with the just I, it's not really changing much, and the solution is in I's anyways, the ones that are given. So I'm just going to keep it like that. And then -7, well, again, collect like terms, these ones together. So I'll have 13I plus, -7 plus 4, that's -3. So let's find that one. So there you go. B says -3 plus 13I. That's exactly my solution. So just make sure that, you're solving according to what's given. With multiple choice questions, I'm not going to find this, if I would have left it, this would have looked a little bit differently. If I come down here and not change it, I would have had 4 plus 13 root -1 minus 7. This simplifies to -3 plus 13 root -1. Now, I look at this and I'm like, oh, well, my solution is not there. But really, I'm the one that made this substitution in the first place to I, so I could just bring it back, right? And then there you go. It would just be B. Okay? All right. I'll see you next question, and just make sure you're not confusing yourself by saying, oh, I've never seen complex numbers before. This is going to be too difficult. Do what you know. They're not going to ask you things that you don't know. So do what you know, and then along the way, make the appropriate substitutions. If things are confusing, so if over here, when you were working with the I, it looked kind of weird and you're like, but I is equal to this, don't make that substitution first. So I'm going to break this into steps, okay? So number 1, expand without worrying about what you're working with, okay? So just like we did over here, we saw this, this one, and then we said, okay, I'm just going to expand and see what I have. Okay, so expand and then simplify, just like we did over here. Simplify. Simplify. And then third one, I'm going to say make appropriate substitution. And if you've noticed, most questions are like this. Make substitution. So we made that substitution of I is equal to root of -1. And the last step is simplify again, right? Simplify. All right. Okay. I will see you next video. Bye.